And head of Asian equity sales, and joining us now. When you have a company like Apple that is really looking to China for growth, a lot of other U.S. companies are looking for that as well. Can they do that when China has the debt, when they don't have the SOE reform?
They can do it, because I think the purchasing power of the Chinese middle class is growing very rapidly. The iPhone is an aspirational product that many Chinese people want. The problem facing Apple specifically is that in China you have enormous competition from a Chinese handset industry that is offering an increasingly better product at a fraction of the price of the iPhone. And as well in China, in countries such as the US, the ecosystem that Apple offers is enormously important. If you have an Apple PC, having an iPhone, it integrates together. In China, that integration is just not as important. The iPhone, the smartphone is used in isolation, and the whole ecosystem that Apple apps offer is not as important. In China, people's lives operate on WeChat. They operate on Alibaba, on Baidu's search engine. So what Apple offers you in China is not as compelling as it is elsewhere. As a result, China will be an important market for Apple, but I think you're going to see Chinese brands in particular take market share.
All right, Simon, thanks very much. Good to see you. Simon Mail, Auerbach Grayson, head of Asian equity sales.
Coming up on the program then, is the oil rally losing energy, or is there more room to run? Nobody better to ask than IHS Vice President Daniel Yergin. He joins Go on set. That's next. And later, UK Chancellor George Osborne reveals to us what a Brexit could mean for the British economy and its impact on the rest of the world. In global markets, let me tell you the impact in the here and now. It's risk aversion. Futures lower. The S&P 500 futures -7 points in London. A FTSE down by 0.7 in Frankfurt. A DAX down by 1.27%. And in the bond market, yields grinding down to new lows. This is Bloomberg Go. I'm Jonathan Ferro. It's risk aversion dominating these markets. US futures softer. Look at European equity markets lower. Switzerland's SMI down by over 1.33%. That's where the underperformance is on the prospect of a stronger Swiss franc as risk aversion really starts to bubble ahead of that big event next week. In the equity markets, the underperformance in the euro land is on the DAX down by 1.2%. On a slightly stronger euro and a much weaker pound. Look at this in the FX market. Sterling down by another 0.5%, a 141 handle on the session. And look to dollar yen with a 105 handle at one point today. 106 we trade, a stronger Japanese yen appreciating against the dollar by about 0.9%. In the bond market, a story, gilt yields fresh all-time lows. 2-year yields, the front end rallying in Switzerland and Japan. So the story is we look for bunds to grind down to zero, steady in the German bond market so far. And in the commodity market, Brent, WTI down around by 1 full percentage point. Alex Steele loves a bit of crude in the morning.
I love my crude in the morning. First thing I look at. For now, let's get to the headlines outside of business from Bloomberg's First Word News. Here is Sherry An.
Thank you, Alex. Twice the FBI interviewed the suspected killer in the Orlando mass murder because of possible ties to terrorism. But each time the agency closed the investigation into Omar Mateen for lack of evidence. Mateen is blamed for the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. 50 people were killed and 53 wounded in the attack at a gay nightclub. Mateen was killed in a shootout with police. Before the shooting, he called 911 to proclaim his allegiance to Islamic State. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the European Commission president may discuss a controversial natural gas pipeline project this week. Putin meets with Jean-Claude Juncker at a conference in St. Petersburg. They may discuss ways Russia could expand its gas output to Europe. Some EU governments are concerned about the bloc's dependence on Russian gas. At the Tony Awards, Hamilton was a big winner. Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical biography about the first U.S. Treasury Secretary won 11 Tonys, just short of the record. The Tony Awards presentation was dedicated to the Orlando shooting victims. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by our 2,400 journalists in more than 150 news bureaus around the world. I'm Sherry Ann. David?
Thank you, Sherry Ann. We're now going to show you a press conference live coming from Orlando, Florida. At the press conference is Governor Rick Scott, the mayor of Orlando, the police chiefs, the special agent in charge from the FBI, all going over the tragic events that happened over the weekend. 50 people shot dead in a nightclub down there. More than 50 were injured by a young man who went in armed with an AR-15 and slaughtered these people after calling and pledging allegiance to Islamic State. This has been tied to terrorism. President Obama has already spoken out on the subject. It will be consuming the nation's attention for the next several days. It's fair to say. Over to John Farrow.
David Weston, thank you very much. To the bond market we go now to discuss a morning must-read with Tom Keene. It's a morning must-watch, and it's a chart. And I've got to say, the global bond market, the most expensive ever in history, but apparently zero yield, zero problem. Check out this bar chart. The returns on the global bond market so far this year, if you're looking at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch Broad Index, almost 5%. The best start to the year on records that go back to the late 90s, the 1997 year to be precise. Tom, we're looking at a fixed income market that traditionally you would judge by the coupon you get, but it's the capital return so far that is dominating market sentiment.
Well, it's bond flows if you're on board, but as you know, there's an immense amount of fear out there. What I find interesting, John, this is after you used my 5 weeks of vacation when you were gone, is Thursday was incredibly nuanced,
Yeah.
Friday was incredibly nuanced, and my major message this morning is there's no let up in sight. What's fascinating is there's so many things moving on the Bloomberg that Francine has to remind me of where German yields are, or Mike McKee has to remind me of where Deutsche Bank and UniCredit share prices are this morning. There's a lot of nuance here within those bonds up, yields down.
I think in the bond market over the last year, it's been a combination of three things. The chase for the capital gain on the back of central banks doing more.
Yeah.
The idea that it's not going to work, therefore you price in lower growth, lower inflation. But the additional point, and I think it dominated last week, was risk aversion. It is not all yields lower. You see spreads wider in Europe Europe specifically today as well, Tom.
There's no question the risks are there, Brexit, and everybody talks about this, but I would say there's less discussion about the new terminal value. One of the hallmarks that we saw on Friday as you were using my 5 weeks of vacation was the idea that John Herman of Mitsubishi lowered his terminal value. That's just one guy, but when you look at the crew trying to game where are we heading with the data check you just did with the heat map, we don't know, and it's to a new lower, as Mr. Herman would suggest, sub 2% terminal value, which is like, in my case, my great-grandparents or your great-great-great-great-grandparents.
So everybody scratches their heads on what is going on here. Allianz weigh in, and they say bonds are in bubble territory. I'll be speaking to the CIO a little bit later. This is the big question. It's the first one I'll ask him. What constitutes a bond market bubble?
I don't have an answer to that other than remember the storm when Supernova Gross, what was it, 8 months ago or something, said...
Short of a lifetime.
Short of a lifetime. I mean, if it was a short of a lifetime then, what is it right now, Mr. Gross?
I believe the yield on a German 10-year at this point, last time I looked, around 2 basis points. Tom Keene will keep you up to speed on surveillance radio, of course. Tom Keene and Michael McKee, 7 to 10 a.m., Bloomberg Surveillance Radio. With those two, weekdays. Alex.
All right, well, talking